You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers initiative, and here to talk with me about the assembled Avengers is John Mills.
Well, I'm here to talk about it, but the thing is, my microphone, it broke, so I had to get a new microphone, and then the guys came and they repossessed my computer, but I found another computer, so, it all worked out all right.
Oh, man, that's so weird, man, because, I had a problem with my own mic, and I had to go to Radio Shack, and then I met the guy that I've known since I was in 5th grade. I couldn't believe he was working at Radio Shack, right? And he's like, "Hey, did you know I was dating?" Anyway, it's a long story.
You know what? Let's just say I let me break into this podcast. Man. So
can we before we even get started? How did they not have Luis do a whole rundown of the entire MCU before you sent people into Endgame? Can you imagine the video and how great it would have been?
It would have been fantastic. It really would have been something special, I think.
I know I'm not the only one who had this as an idea.
What's interesting, and obviously we're talking about Ant-Man this time around, but I think something that we'll get to pretty quick in the discussion is exactly how dynamic these secondary characters are to the point that they steal the show.
Yeah.
And it's a real, just amazing lesson in a movie that has a huge, messy production history of how you can, sort of spin silk from a sow's ear.
Absolutely.
As the saying goes.
Well, before we get into it, because we do have a ton to talk about here with Ant-Man, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed so you get the episode as soon as it drops. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or even Spotify now, give us a star rating and review, help people find the show. And, of course, you can find us on Twitter at TrekFM or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can also find the show, The 602 Club, on Twitter at The 602 Club. You can also find us on Instagram at The 602 Club TFM. You could find us online at Trek.fm. And, there's just so many places. I mean, we're everywhere. So make sure that you check all of that out. But, John, you did mention something here. And it's something that we have run into already in the MCU, which is, I wouldn't say it's a troubled production, but it is a production to which one person had been working on this for an exorbitantly long time and obviously had an incredible idea in his mind of what he wanted to do, and in the end, he leaves because of creative differences. And we're talking about none other than Edgar Wright and his writing partner, Joe Cornish. They had been working on this movie for years, and he ends up having to leave because Marvel wants to go a different direction with the film than he does. And, I mean, just to throw out some of the idea, he definitely wanted to have the movie kind of open with a prologue that had, seeing Hank Pym as Ant-Man in the 60s, kind of doing this Tales of Astonishment mode, almost like a James Bond movie, Indiana Jones movie, where, you have this adventure before the adventure kind of thing. And I wanted to ask you, I know you know him pretty well as a director, and, he definitely has a very specific point of view. He's not a director who's going to take less than he wants, and not going to get to do what he wants. So how did you feel about him not getting a chance to do this movie?
Honestly, it's not something that played on my mind a whole lot going in. I knew that Wright had been involved and he walked away and they had different ideas and plans. And so there's a little bit of that playing in your mind when you go in where it's like, oh, I wonder, which part is original, which part is new. Sort of the same way that you approached Solo: A Star Wars Story after a couple of viewings, where it's like, okay, well, I know that this was shot when the original directors were still on board, and I know that Ron Howard changed this and moved that. How would this have played if they'd gone their way? And I think that there's a little bit of that with it. And I think Edgar Wright probably would have turned out something extremely special and unique and wonderful. But I can honestly say that it never really played on my mind. If any, and that what's weird about that is we all get spun up about the creative differences angle. Oh, they're off this production. Oh, they're bringing in these people. Oh, they're rearranging Rogue One. Oh, they're doing this. And we get all caught up in that. And I think that probably Ant-Man is a good one to sort of take a minute and think sometimes these things just need to happen that way, or you're going to get Age of Ultron.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And it's interesting because when I was coming into the film, doing just a little bit of research here, just kind of into the whole process, because I remember it happened, and so I was doing some reading about it, and it was kind of fascinating to hear Evangeline Lilly talk about the idea that she thinks that Edgar Wright's movie would have been incredible and great to watch. She just doesn't know if it would completely fit in, though, with the MCU. And in the sense of it feeling like and being the MCU movie that it needs to be, because as we've talked about, this really is a place and this really is a movie where, and a series, these things are at the point where it does have to fit in. It needs to be a part of the rest of the whole. And
right.
I think you're right. That's like you brought up Rogue One, and I think that's a good movie to bring up because obviously there are a lot of behind the scenes things going on with that film, and it turned out to be something really great. Solo is another great example. We both love that movie, and there's a ton of upheaval there, and that also turns out really well. And I do wonder, though, if there is a loss of, and it is this the demarcation moment for the loss of some artistic integrity to the MCU, where we really are going to be like, we need things to more fit into a mold than be unique?
No. I think that demarcation line is Age of Ultron.
Okay.
Because I think that, and again, we referenced this when we talked about Guardians of the Galaxy. You have Guardians of the Galaxy, Age of Ultron, Ant-Man. And while Edgar Wright leaves production because of creative differences, I think that Ant-Man and Guardians have a very distinct and unique style and a very... they go for more comedy. They go for more, sort of like over the top sort of emotion.
Sure.
As opposed to something that's more restrained, like Winter Soldier or something like that. And so I do think it's Age of Ultron. And I think that what you see is not a loss of art per se, but definitely I think there's a line drawn in Age of Ultron where Marvel basically says, we're not doing this again. You're either on board with what we're asking you to do, or you're leaving, and that's fine. No ill will, except in Joss Whedon's case, I think there was a little ill will. And we're done with you. Be gone.
I think that is a good point, and maybe one of the reasons why they make the choice they do here, and they part ways with right before it gets to the point where things are really going to be a mess, and so I think that's a really well thought out idea as to when the demarcation line is. But I do think that then this is the movie that in some ways, I won't say suffers, but is changed artistically because they do want it to fit more within the mold that they're going for, rather than it be an artistic work, right? Not to say there isn't artistry in Ant-Man, but they want that artistry to fit within their parameters. And so and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so, because we can look at that and think, oh man, well that's just terrible. I mean, but it, like you were saying, it's not always a bad thing for the film, and the finished product, right? In the end, it really does come down to how does the finished product work? And so,
right.
So you get, Adam McKay that comes in. Paul Rudd, of course, is going to be the star. Rudd and McKay actually work on the script together, and they end up adding a few things that obviously are going to be really important in the future, with the fact that they include the quantum realm, they include Janet and what happened to her, the fight with an Avenger. They add some things in here that play into subsequent films as well, and so it seems like in many ways, what they were willing to do is they were willing to play within the Marvel milieu more, and I think that is what they really wanted. Obviously, they wanted that from this film.
That's the one thing that I felt was tacked on, both when I first saw it and when I rewatched it here, is that fight with an Avenger. Having Falcon come in, it's a cute scene. It's well staged action. I don't have a problem with it in concept per se, but it's the one part of the movie I remember walking out of the movie theater with Craig saying, man, that really felt wedged in. That just felt like they felt obligated to have him face an Avenger to bring it in. And the thing that irked me about it was everything else fits into the Marvel universe just fine. They reference the Avengers. They talk about Stark.
Oh, sure.
And I fought for my life to keep this out of Stark's hands. So we get our first blush at the idea of other people didn't think that Howard Stark was so great.
Right.
And we see I think it's beautiful in the beginning how we see the Triskelion being built and having that confrontation, dropping that hint that S.H.I.E.L.D. had been corrupted that early on, and that it was just root and branch. So that ties into Winter Soldier really, really well. But that Falcon scene, it's fun on its own, but it's Stinger territory. It didn't feel like it needed to be an organic piece of this story. Do you agree with that, or do you think that I'm pushing too hard?
I don't know if I agree. Now, and let me say, I can see what you're saying. In the sense that, does it necessarily have to be here? But I think, to me, the way that they did do it, I think it works for the film, and it's a lot of fun. I think still, and I think it's well done, like you said, and the reason they're there is to steal a piece of technology that they need to make this work from an old Stark lab, and it just turns out that the old Stark lab has been turned into the new Avengers playground, and I think this was a fantastic way to get any of the other Avengers in, right? And it does also seem like one of those things where by doing this, they were able to create a relationship between Falcon and Ant-Man that leads well into the very next film and feels a little bit more organic in the sense of like, we've talked about the idea that this is like television, and in many ways too, it also just kind of feels like something that would happen in the comics. So in all of that, I don't feel like it's as forced as you do. And I think the biggest part of that is that I find the scene so enjoyable that it's hard to be upset that it's in the film, right? Like, yeah, they could probably take it out and find a different way to do this. Absolutely. But at the same time, I kind of enjoy the scene so much that I can't really be upset that it's in the movie. And I feel like, yeah, I don't know, I might miss it if it was gone too, just because it's an enjoyable part of the film.
Yeah, I and let me be clear, while I feel that it's wedged in, it's not something where I hated it or something like that.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
It works okay and it's fine, but I think sometimes I just stray a little bit farther on the scale toward brutal focus in the story. Sure. And so it's like, no, and I freely admit that this becomes sometimes for me a real hindrance because I just look at it as, can I take this puzzle piece out and not miss it?
Right.
And if I can say even for a moment, yes, I immediately turn against it because it's, and the ironic thing being that there are so many movies where I love them, even though they have those extraneous scenes. So it really seems to be a case by case thing. But just to be clear, it didn't bother me a whole great deal. It's just, it felt like it didn't need to be there.
And I mean, I guess too, like there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a very valid point to bring up, the fact that, when we talk about any of these movies, and when we talked about it when we talked about Age of Ultron, the idea of like there being extraneous material that you feel like you could have excised or you could have cut down so that it would have worked better with the movie. I think that makes complete sense to me, because obviously we had parts in that film where we really were like, okay, gosh, you could cut this down, you could change this, and it would be a much better movie. And that's, I think, the thing here. It's like, when I put it up against what had just come before, and I think to myself, well, if I took this out, would it really make it a much better movie? I don't think so. Like it still works within the context of the film well enough to where I don't feel like, oh, well, if I had excised that would have gone from a 4.5 to a 5 or a 4 to, like, I think that's the part where I would have been really thinking about, okay, I've got to make that change. So, I wanted to ask you, about, because we're talking about this idea of, and I really like that you went here, and I think it leads organically into this question I had. Is this not one of the most compactly plotted, thematically, and every other way Marvel films that we've seen so far? I mean, like,
oh yeah,
like maybe since some of the, I mean, like, I think of like Iron Man or Winter Soldier, or like, it just feels like there's everything in this movie is working together perfectly to build another part of the movie, and so
I completely agree with that. It is, with the exception of that Winter Soldier thing, this moves at such a clip that it's over before you know it. And I remember watching it, and there are movies where you can feel their length, and you're like, okay, let's wrap it up. Let's get there. Dark World is a great example. Yeah. Could we please speed this up? I've really had enough of this. But this it found that sweet spot, and I think that is Peyton Reed's gift in the way that he can motivate the whole team to find the structure for the story that can move really good. Because when you think about it, he does this tremendous blend of like montage within montage at certain points. When Scott's learning how to use the suit while also working on the suit, while also getting in arguments. And there's so many things moving in parallel, but it never feels like something is occurring too early or too late. And so that's really complex script writing, and you need somebody like Peyton Reed who's able to flip those things around effortlessly. I'm a huge fan of his. If anybody can't guess on that, he did do the movie Bring It On, which is a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. It truly is. You'd think, wait, it's about cheerleaders starring Kirsten Dunst. John, why are you singing this movie's praises? Trust me, you'll love it. And this has that same sort of energy. And I think what it is, again, we've hit on this before with Iron Man 3, with Winter Soldier, with Guardians of the Galaxy. Peyton Reed is one of those directors who gets the performances, the precisely right performances out of his people. I believe I've seen Michael Douglas my entire life. Mm-hmm. Guy's been acting for literally like 50 or 60 years. And I lose Michael Douglas in this movie, and I see Hank Pym. That's a tremendous accomplishment. Evangeline Lilly, I'm a huge lostie, and I should be looking at her and seeing Kate. Nope, I didn't. I saw these characters, and again, I know I've mentioned it before, but man, the crew that is, Scott's friends are absolute scene stealers in this, but it doesn't take anything away. They are the most welcome comic relief. They're so deftly performed that Scott's comedy doesn't feel like shoehorned Iron Man 2 comedy. And it also, in a way, is a subtler Peter Quill. That side crew helps Paul Rudd shine in this movie, because his humor, even though it's very Tony Stark, Peter Quill-ish, he seems so much more subdued by comparison, and they're never in a scene that they don't belong. And I think that really works to the advantage of everybody.
Well, and I also think that part of the humor aspect here that you're talking about is that with Scott, the humor is more self-deprecating. And I think that's what makes it so lovable, because yes, it's quippy, but a lot of it has to do with him being self-deprecating. And that works for this down-and-out character, who can't seem to find a break or find a way to change and move on with his life. And, I think the thing that really makes this work for me the most is when I was piecing together and really coming to the realization that this movie is about two fathers who have both made the same mistakes in many ways with their daughters. And they're just trying to earn back their daughter's love in many ways. And everything about this movie builds around those themes. And that's what makes this movie so good. And I think you're absolutely right, is that Peyton Reed really crafts a story around that thematic element, and everything else plays into that. It's about the relationships of these two fathers with their daughters, and the rest of the stuff is just there to support that, even all the crazy stuff we get. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the movie, is because it makes it holistic. And that's the thing that I think some of the Marvel movies that we've talked about recently, whether it was Ultron or Thor: The Dark World, they've kind of missed that holistic element where everything is playing into the next part, so that you never, and that's what I think leads to that feeling, like you said, where it's like it moves along so quickly, you're out before you know it, and you're almost wishing there was more, right? Because you enjoyed the journey so much. And so I really think when it comes to like the thematic elements, that's the thing that brings this together. And it makes it one of the most heartfelt Marvel movies we've had in a while as well, because you feel for Scott in his desire to live up to his daughter's thought of him. You feel for Hank and the loss of his wife. You feel for the loss of his friends at S.H.I.E.L.D., who he sees as people who've been trying to misuse his own technology and steal it from him, he sees. And you feel it when he's estranged from his own daughter because she sold him out before realizing that she was wrong. It's like there's all of these great elements, and I think it's the thing that really brings the film together. And you touched on this too, but the casting in this movie is 100% perfect. It's phenomenal.
If somebody had come to me at some point and said, I'm going to cast T.I. in a movie, and, he'll be one of the breakout scene stealers, I'd have been like, yeah, okay, sure. But he winds up, I can't. The thing is, you wind up being sounding sort of like a fanboy because everybody came out of this movie talking about the crew,
right?
Because they were so blown away by what they did, and these were star-making turns. And the thing that blows my mind as well is that David Dastmalchian, I always butcher his last name. I hope I pronounced it right there. But he gets to be in both the DC universe and the Marvel universe, and then he bounces back to the DC universe for the Suicide Squad. So, this guy is a go-to comic book movie character actor.
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing him pop up. It's just so wild to see him go back and forth. But, man, I remember the first time that I saw the movie, Michael Pena stole the show so much. People were practically out of their chairs cheering for him. And what a star-making turn for that guy. I just can't get over it. And the fact that there are so many just subtle little moments that play so well. The one thing I want to ask you, though, is there are great themes in this. There are tremendously fun moments. Do you think that the balance of score and soundtrack music, selected songs, the diegetic stuff, do you think they hit the right mix here? Because Guardians of the Galaxy, let's just go ahead and say Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man are in the same family of type of Marvel movie. And Guardians of the Galaxy, we both agreed, we're I can't really recall a theme too much. The music's there, but it's spot music. It's okay. And everybody knows Awesome Mix Volume 1. With this, do you feel there was a better balance between score and in-universe music? Or do you think that this falls into the Guardians of the Galaxy trap?
I think it's slightly better than Guardians in the sense that the actual score is a little bit more memorable. And part of that is because it taps into that kind of heist, caper, Ocean's 11 type of feel with the score. And it's the perfect type of score for this movie because that's exactly what this is basically an Ocean's 11 type film. And now I will say it's only slightly better. So, and slightly more memorable. And this is another place where I do feel like it's not a detriment to the film, but the film could have been even better if the thematic work for the music had been even more memorable.
I get that. The music's done by Christoph Beck, who also did Frozen a couple of years prior, and he comes back for Frozen 2, so he's part of the Disney stable. And I agree with you, the music isn't particularly quote unquote memorable. It doesn't have the same weight as when I sit down and I watch something like Endgame, right? But at the same time, isn't that an unfair metric I'm putting on it? Because Ant-Man isn't the same type of movie. Isn't he just delivering exactly what he's supposed to here? Which is music that works, but doesn't overpower the scene. In a sense, you could make an argument that by the score being a little bit more less emphasized or less memorable, it works to the advantage of the characters because it's an accent for what they're doing to make that, like it's sort of that whole thing of, it's like editing. If the editing draws attention to itself, it didn't do its job right. It should be invisible to you. So in a sense, the composer for a movie like Ant-Man is boxed in where they can't make themselves too memorable, because if they do, they've taken you out of those comic rhythms with Michael Pena and T.I. and David Dastmalchian and all of those people.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that part. And then I think that, the work that they do with, some of the needle drops work perfectly for the film. And again, I think in some ways this is the place where it's working to create a whole, and the music works well within the movie. It might not necessarily be a soundtrack that I would want to listen to over and over again outside of the film, but it works with inside the film. And I also kind of think this is another place where, okay, so yeah, the score is serviceable for the film. I also kind of think the villain is just serviceable for the film. Because
really?
I don't find... Now, Corey Stoll is perfect to choose as this character of a kind of unhinged person who, is trying to live up in the shadow of Hank Pym and never able to eclipse it, and is slowly going insane, right? But I wouldn't say he's not like one of your top tier villains in the sense of like, when I think of for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like he doesn't live up to somebody like Loki. But he works within this film very well. He's just not somebody that I think of when I think of a list of Marvel villains. I'm going to pull him out as being one of the best.
Here's where I'm going to kind of disagree with you, because I think that he's a more refined and he's an extension of Obadiah Stane.
Okay, I could see that.
Same type of feel to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he's a refinement in the sense that I think that the character is a little bit more pulled in and a little bit more, there's some better guardrails on him.
Sure.
I think that he is.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there.
He's a more believable villain too. This is definitely one of the MCU movies that Age of Ultron just completely doesn't care about rooting it in quote unquote reality. Ant-Man is unique in the fact that I believe this villain exists. I believe that his goal is true. I believe that, and it does all of this stuff that makes me think, okay, well, yeah, if you have a magic particle, I think this is how it would work. It's like good Star Trek, where it tricks me into thinking that its BS could actually be scientific, right? And so I think that it's a catch-22, because yes, he's exactly the type of villain that this movie needs, but at the same time, by being the exact type of villain this movie needs, that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
And yep. I think that Corey Stoll is having a fantastic time with it. I think that he is having so much fun with this, and he sells it.
Yes.
I believe that this is a guy who doesn't think he's the bad guy.
Right.
He thinks that his actions are justified because he's been so driven toward this one goal, he can't let anybody get in his way. And so, yeah, I like that. It works for me.
And in that, I think we definitely agree, and I see 100%. And I think that's, again, even though I wouldn't call him one of the top tier villains, I think he works perfectly for this film, and therefore I don't have an issue at all with him, and I think, that's something about this movie that I think is really interesting, because at the same time that we're talking about this film, it is introducing us to an incredibly complex and, like you said, techno-babble-filled idea, which is, we're shrinking the distance between molecules so that you can get smaller, and they're introducing the quantum realm. And I mean, this is a whole new part of the MCU, just like in many ways Thor was, with kind of introducing quote unquote, magic, right? With quote unquote gods. What's interesting is that this is the close of phase 2. Phase 3 is really going to introduce us to the ultra crazy in the MCU, in the sense that not only are we going to get the quantum realm here, but we are going to get the full-on magic realm with like Doctor Strange. And so what I think is fantastic here is that they are able to introduce something like the quantum realm and make it make sense in a 2-hour movie, but not have it take over the rest of the movie. Like, it never overshadows what's really important here, which are these human characters and their thematic elements and what they're going through and their growth. That's really incredible.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, that's a function of the script writing and of Reed, where they understand that they can't sit there and get bound up in it. And the Iron Man character and the movies in their weaker moments get a little bit too consumed with explaining how things are happening. Ant-Man has figured out that the, if you will, the Star Wars explanation of things works really well, where give me just enough to understand that the characters who are talking about it know what they're talking about. Give me that impression, and I will just accept what they say, as opposed to giving me so much detail that I can sit there as an educated person, hopefully educated. Some people might dispute that with me, but we'll see. But like one of those things where if you give me too much, I'm going to start breaking it down. But if you give me just a little, and I believe Michael Douglas when he talks about, he's in a way, he's speaking as somebody who has authority. And so that delivery is very important to say, no, you're going to get in the quantum realm. Nothing makes any sense there. And he doesn't go down and try to explain the quantum realm to Scott. He's like, this is what happens, and let's move on from that.
Because could you understand it anyway? I mean, like...
Right, exactly. What's he going to do? Give him like a PhD course in the movie? No, he hits it and he keeps moving, and so it works really, really well. And so that's it's a function of all of those things coming together. And the thing is, the thing that I'm sort of tripping on here though is that we're heaping all of this praise on it, and I think it's very justified. I think it's very necessary. I think it's very. There is a lot of positive to say about this movie, but I want to open the floor to complaints that you might have. Where do you think that this movie stumbles?
I mean, there's a long pause here because I don't think it does.
Really?
I really don't.
You think that this is just one of those knock it out of the park 5 cylinders?
And the thing is that, I mean, I don't know if when we get to ratings that it would be, 5 stars or anything, but I think when we were talking about the idea of how everything in this movie works together, it feels like a complete story in every sense of the word for everyone involved. And it feels like again, like an Iron Man in that sense. It feels like a Winter Soldier in that sense, where you're creating a full-fledged thing. And I don't know, maybe I'm just talking myself into this movie being way better than I thought it was, because I'm consistently surprised with how I reacted to this viewing and being like, everything about this movie is working the way it should. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was this idea, because I was really struck by the fact that we introduce a new female character who feels complete and important in the film just as much as any of her male counterparts, in a way that Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow has not yet up to this point, except for in Winter Soldier.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one because of the fact that they very much approached Black Widow as, we'll give you bits and pieces of her here and there. She's always going to be treated as a side character. I think the difference here is that our female character has an obvious history that predates our main character's introduction. He's interrupting her story. She's not interrupting his. And you very much get the sense, because of how well it's written and how well it's performed, you believe the history that's there. And it has nothing to do with Scott. Nothing at all. There is nothing about this character that needs him to exist. And so Hope becomes this really interesting character because of the fact that I'm allowed to relate to her on her own terms. Gamora even suffers a little bit because I'm introduced to her to relate to her in terms of her sister and in terms of Thanos. Black Widow, we've already talked about. So, and Pepper Potts is only ever relatable in terms of who she is in terms of her relationship with Tony. So I think that, and Maria Hill is a side character who doesn't get a whole lot of screen time. She's very well played, but you know, it's not like she's a main character. She's a cameo, practically. So yeah, I agree though. I think that this is a female character who gets to be her own person, which is sadly unique up to this point in the MCU. Scarlet Witch almost gets there, but Whedon fumbles.
Yeah. And I would say next to, I think she might be our strongest female character next to Carter. You know, when we talked about Captain America, the First Avenger, Peggy Carter is an incredibly strong character with her own sense of being before Steve comes on the scene, right?
True.
You know, Steve interrupts her life the same way. So I feel like that's... And so the best representations of female characters I think we've seen have been, Captain America, First Avenger, Winter Soldier. I think we both thought Incredible Hulk was great with Betty's portrayal. But here, I think Hope creates a character who we can tell going forward she is going to be more important to this series, at least, and to the MCU in the sense that she is a fully formed, fully fledged character, regardless of being female or not. And I think that was just something that was really struck by in the movie as I was rewatching it about it really hasn't been this way in the MCU for the most part.
I agree.
So
I agree.
And it's great that it's Evangeline Lilly too. I mean, I think that's the other thing that helps is the casting there is so good with her.
And this is going to sound really stupid, and I get it. I get it. But much like Michael Douglas's goatee, changing her hair because of how well known Evangeline Lilly is extremely important and an extremely good decision, because you need to visually divorce her from who she's known for being before I can buy in. Because again, as a Lostie, not a chance I'm going to see anybody but Kate until you put her in that wig. And then I'm like, oh, okay, this is a different character. And I know how dumb that's going to sound to some people. I really do. But Fabio is Fabio when he has his long, luscious locks growing out of the side of his head. You give him a crew cut, he's not Fabio anymore. You know? So, and Google. Kids, if you don't know who Fabio is, do yourself a favor. do yourself a favor. Look him up, please.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Fabio. He even had a 900 number back in the day, just so everybody knows.
Okay.
He did. You could call and listen to Fabio. No. It wasn't like one of the bad ones.
Good.
They ran this on daytime TV.
You never called
like
it. That's good.
I don't know.
Glad
I don't
that's the
know.
case.
I never called it, but it was like, yeah, listen. The ads lead me to believe that it was Fabio just talking about, I don't know, stock tips or something like that. Something fun, but you could listen to Fabio, so it was a good thing. Actually, well, you know what? That's a whole rabbit hole. Never mind. Just look them up, kids. So this is what's tough then, though. If we can't come at it and hit problems with it, because the thing is, I go back and I start.
Well, are there any other than the one problem that you mentioned, which was you thought, maybe we could take out the fight with, the Avenger with Falcon? Was there anything that you were thinking to yourself?
I think that it accidentally winds up spinning tires a little bit in the resolution with Hope and Hank, where Scott comes out, talks to her, they have a moment, and then she goes in, she has the moment again, but with Hank, and then Scott interrupts it. Like, there are little moments like that where it's just the gears don't mesh quite as well as they should. I also think that even though I love him as an actor, Bobby Cannavale's character as the stepdad or the step fiance, whatever, they're not married by that point, with Judy Greer, it's too convenient that he's a police officer who's going after Scott, and he's engaged to Scott's ex. Like, it doesn't. It feels a little too convenient to exist. And so that sort of thing is where I'm a little bit disconnected in those moments, where it's one thing to have him have conflict with the future stepdad. That makes sense. That makes complete sense. But then he's also the cop that's going after him is it's a little too compact.
I can understand that. Yeah.
So those are the only major stumbling blocks I hit, though, because the thing is, the movie moves so quickly that it doesn't give you time to find a problem. And that's why the editing is so good. And that's why it's so tightly written. Is it just...
Sure.
Even when I'm having that problem with the fact that, okay, all right, he's fighting Falcon. Do I really need this? It's over so fast that I don't really mind. It's, it's not that big a problem for me.
Well, and I think that's one of the places where it just understands what it is, which is a comic book movie, right? But it's a tightly compact, well-written, holistic film that is only mildly concerned with the MCU at large. It's telling its own tale, which I think is really important. And that's one of the things, like, our love for the Incredible Hulk came from that, which was, it was telling its own tale with only being tangentially connected to the rest of the MCU.
And it's important to note that getting an origin movie this late in the game emphasizes two things. One, it's really well done. Two, there's no reason we couldn't get a Black Widow origin movie by this point.
Yeah.
Listen, it doesn't even need to be an origin movie like this one is. Just a Black Widow focused movie where we get some of her history. Why does Ant-Man get it?
Yeah.
But she doesn't.
I don't know.
She's been in the first Avengers movies for Pete's sake. Give her her own movie, please.
Yep. What I kind of love too is that, we've talked behind the scenes for years and years now, and I know, you and the idea of a Black Widow movie, never really hit you with a ton of bricks. But the fact that you're saying that means a lot. Like, it's like this character watching the movies like this is somebody who is important. And it's like, why are we not focusing on her at all? And why does the MCU never take that risk? Like, why is DC the only one who took a risk that the, third movie in, we're going to do a female-led film And we won't get that in the MCU all the way till, Captain Marvel.
Well, the really weird thing is that, especially by this point, Marvel had the, for lack of a better term, political capital to do it.
Yes.
Even if
absolutely.
it sucked, Thor the Dark World, and more importantly, the Beneath Contempt Iron Man 2 proved that you could have a misstep and people would forgive you. Even if that Black Widow movie looked like it was it wouldn't bomb by this point. There was so much momentum. It's not making less than $500 million, period. So why not take the risk by this point? You're going to make money. Age of Ultron proves that even if you have a crap product, you're going to make hundreds of millions of dollars. Just go for it, man. Like, just jump in. Now, counterpoint, I don't think I still haven't seen Black Widow. I'm going to see it as part of this watch and everything. I don't think Black Widow winds up being as enjoyable as Ant-Man, because Ant-Man is a movie I didn't think I wanted or needed in my life. But I remember walking out of the theater saying, man, I had a good time. That was a lot of fun. I forgot about my problems for 2 hours. And watching it this time, forgot about my problems for 2 hours. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Thank you. I got enough going on in my life. Hey, all right. I had a good time. I had some laughs. I thought, and the thing is, the special effects are phenomenal throughout the whole thing.
They are phenomenal.
You look at Age of Ultron.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Age of Ultron. We harped on there's questionable matting. Dark World, there's effects where it's like, that doesn't really hold up. I'm watching this movie how many years later, and I'm like, this is solid. There's nothing in here that I think doesn't work visually. It's stunning.
Nope.
Absolutely stunning. And considering the fact that you have somewhere there's a fight. Again, okay, fine. The fight with Falcon is worth it in the sense that him going small and growing is done so seamlessly that I don't sit there and go, oh, that effect didn't hold up. Like, I'm just with it.
Yep.
And it works perfectly.
Well, and the fact that they make his effect when he gets smaller, like, it has that comic effect where you can actually see the progression. It's perfectly done in that sense. And I think that's the thing about this movie is that, and I'm glad you brought this up, because the effects are a representation of them understanding what they have with the idea of making things small, and has the most fun so far in the entire MCU at this point with its concept.
Yes.
What happens if we can make things bigger and smaller?
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. I mean, that fight at the end with the train set is just brilliant.
Brought the house down.
It's bloody brilliant.
When I saw it brought the house down. I remember the entire theater erupting in laughter with the train, even though you'd seen it in the trailers. Right? That was my one thing, was like, in the trailers, they kind of blew that moment, but still the audience erupted in laughter because we were so caught up in the fun of everything that was happening that it was just, I'm laughing about it, thinking about it now. It's just fun. It's just a great time.
Yep.
So, to your point, yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and it was one of the things that rewatching this film I was just really surprised by, because again, it was another place where the movie worked in a way that some of the other Marvel movies hadn't, in the sense of, the effects, the concept, the whole holistic nature. Again, I keep saying that word, but like the holistic nature of this film, everything is working together in a way that is pretty phenomenal. And so I only had one question then really to ask you before we got to the ratings and everything. How do you feel about the two little stingers we get? Because we get the one with Hope, and then of course we get the one which is literally just a scene pulled from Civil War.
They should have just had the one with Hope. I don't like the fact that there's this, it's the scene from Civil War. Just show a trailer for the movie. Seriously, I mean, that's what you're basically doing.
Kind of like what they did with Avengers in that one. Like, they just showed a trailer at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, just show a trailer, or even, because it plays too much like Thanos opens the safe and he pulls the gauntlet out. Fine, I'll do it myself. Why? What does that have to do with anything? What are you talking about? Like, I think the second stinger this is the point where the stingers are starting to feel too indulgent, where now they've set the expectation of 2 overall. And so, okay, we're going to give you 2. And it's just, okay, just give me one good one. I'm fine. What about you? Did you feel the same way, or?
Well, I just felt like the one with Hope didn't need to be a stinger. And then the second one is unnecessary, in all honesty. And so I just, I mean, it's fine, but it wasn't necessary. And so, and I mean, and I do like the one with Hope because it does have an implication on the story that we saw. It's the full rounding of the arc for the father and the daughter.
Yeah.
And their place together, and him like opening the door to trust her and to say, you deserve this. You deserve that. Like, he's tried to kind of protect her this whole movie because of everything that happened with his wife, but he's also realized she deserves to be able to make the same choices that his wife did. And because she's an adult. And I obviously that opens the door then for the next movie we have with these two characters together, with Ant-Man and the Wasp there together. And
which I'll be watching for the first time here on Assembling Avengers.
Yeah, which is super exciting.
There you go.
Well, I then have to ask you, because we've had nothing but effusive praise for Ant-Man so far. What is the rating you have for this film?
4.5. I take a half off for those little nitpicky things, but and this is the thing, is once you approach a certain level, the nitpicky things seem worse. There can be a movie that I would rank lower than this, where some of the nitpicky things, you're like, well, you didn't pick on those things. Well, yeah, because I was talking about the bigger problems. Whereas with this, as you climb the mountain, that last little bit before the summit is just a little bit harder to get up, because you've built up so much up to that point. So I'm at a solid 4.5. I could be talked into a 5 after this rewatch, because somebody could look at me and say, you're being too much of a hard-nosed jerkweed about that Falcon scene, or the Hope thing not grinding.
Yeah, get off your jackwagon.
Yeah, I know, right? But I'm firmly on my jackwagon right now, so I'm sticking with 4.5 stars. What about you?
So this went from a 3.5 stars, where it was for some reason, I don't remember why. It is a 4.5 stars. I'm at the same place. It's like, and I think you're absolutely right in the sense that when we're getting this far in the MCU, it's like, okay, there has to be something that is just it has to have everything perfect, right? And there's nothing that's not really great here for me. It's just not reaching the level of the 5-star film that is Winter Soldier, right? And so that's I think that's where it comes down to. And so, but yeah, I mean, gosh, 4.5 stars. It creates a conundrum there with the ratings.
But see, I think also that watching these in quick succession and seeing this follow Age of Ultron so quickly really, really illustrates how good this movie is. Because I see Age of Ultron, and then a week later I watch this and I go, oh, wow. Oh, yeah. I have to really give credit for how well this turned out, because Age of Ultron was a mess. So, yeah, well, I mean, this is the end of phase 2. And the thing is, you always make me go first. I want to make you go first this time. I got to know what your rankings wind up as right now. With Ant-Man being a 4.5 star, where are we slotting?
So, of course, number 1 is The Winter Soldier. Then number 2 is Iron Man. Number 3, Iron Man 3. Then we've got the first Avenger. Then it's Ant-Man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then it is The Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy. Avengers. And then we get Thor: The Dark World. Iron Man 2. And, of course, at the end, where it belongs, is, of course, Thor.
Okay. Ant-Man winds up throwing things all topsy-turvy. And let me explain why. Guardians of the Galaxy is actually going to lose where it is in the rankings right now and wind up getting dropped because watching it in this quick succession, I can't help but compare Ant-Man to Guardians of the Galaxy and say, oh, wait, no, that one really got the comedy right. Guardians of the Galaxy wins my heart, like all of that stuff. I love it. But in all honesty, Ant-Man makes me realize that I've been treating Guardians of the Galaxy with some kid gloves in terms of where I rank things. So we wind up with, at the top of the list, Winter Soldier. Number 2 slot is going to be Iron Man 3, which is another 5-star movie. Then we're going to end up with Ant-Man at its 4.5 stars, which knocks out Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, to be fair, Guardians of the Galaxy, because of the comparisons, slots down in such a way that Ant-Man is number 3, Iron Man is number 4, and Guardians of the Galaxy slips from number 3 to number 5.
Wow.
Followed by Captain America, Hulk, Avengers, Thor, Avengers, Age of Ugtron, Thor, The Dark Blech, and...
Oh, I even forgot Ultron, didn't I?
And just absolutely hammering it as if I'm in the Hulkbuster armor, Iron Man 2.
I forgot to mention that Ultron on the bottom of my list. I'm sorry, folks. It's so far down in the pit that I couldn't even remember it was there.
Is it dead last for you? Age of Ultron is dead last. You're right. Wow. And this is the problem, is just as Guardians of the Galaxy slid on this one because of Ant-Man, I reserve the right, as I reconsider everything, to drop Age of Ultron lower, because I can honestly tell you, just like Guardians of the Galaxy dropped a bit more because I saw Ant-Man, I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at my rankings right here. I'm like, man, Age of Ultron, maybe I was being too kind to it. And yeah. So over time, it'll change. We reserve the right to do that, y'all, because it's our show and we're allowed to make up the rules as we go along. So there you go.
It's so crazy. I mean, in all honesty, I can't believe that's actually the case for me. I mean, Ant-Man just really surprised me here, and I think, as it should, it was really good. So, okay. Well, John, this has been a blast. We have finally finished Phase 2.
Yes.
We'll be moving into Phase 3 in the new year.
Yep.
Before we hit Phase 3, we're going to return to Snyder Cuts to talk about Army of Thieves, which is going to be exciting.
Yes.
But if anybody wants to catch up with you and talk about the first 2 phases, or, I don't know, maybe they're like, hey, John, did you see Spider-Man, the new one? And want to get your thoughts, where can they find you?
I'm not going to see Spider-Man No Way Home until it's on home video, y'all. Just, trust me. It's just the way things are going to be. I'm too focused on the Batman at this point. You can find me online as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. Connect with me on Letterboxd. I can't quit Twitter because I don't know. I need to find some new addiction. It's sick. But Kessel Junkie is my username. You can find me over on the Nerd Party Network, where I co-host 2 shows. One show is called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors, whether their entire career or by certain specific decades or what have you, or different categories. And I'm also co-hosting what I feel is a delightful Star Wars show, where we go truly just absolutely deep dive, called Aggressive Negotiations, which I co-host with you, Matthew Rushing.
And, of course, you could find me on The Orb, Warp 5, and Literary Treks. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise, and Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And, of course, you can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, as we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But, of course, thank you so much for joining us.
Avengers!